Welcome. We are here to do Chapter 10, Externalities. If you recall, I said in an earlier session that government action can sometimes improve upon market outcomes, particularly when there is a market failure. And one of the market failures is when we have externalities. We'll talk about it. Sometimes markets do fail to allocate resources efficiently, and government at that point can potentially improve the market allocation. And what kind of policies would work? That's a big debate. And importantly, I wanted to alert you that you will be doing some form of a debate, although you are in an asynchronous section, but we are figuring it out, maybe writing up a platform about externalities. So this is, and I have put a lot of information about externalities in your module. And there's just a few graphical analysis I'm going to focus on today, but definitely really important. I teach an environmental economics course, so it's quite close to my heart in terms of what's happening to the environment. So let's just define, what do I mean when I say there is an externality? Very quickly, externality is when there is a market action and that results in an outcome that could have a negative impact or a positive impact. So this is, and the uncompensated impact on one person's action on the well-being of a bystander. So this is what I'm saying is that I may not partake in that market transaction. I am not one of the players in the market, but I am being affected by the market transaction. The fact that the goods are being exchanged is affecting me either positively or negatively, all right? So that's why we talk about this as a market failure, because market was not able to allocate resources efficiently. When it is negative externality, and when I give you some examples, it'll be clear. Negative is that the impact of this transaction, impact on the bystander, the third party, instead of saying bystander. Mankiw uses, so I am using that. It's adverse. We call it the third party, the person who was not involved in the market transaction. Positive, again, not involved in the market transaction, but the impact on me, the third party, impact on the bystander, the third party is positive or beneficial, which is nice. That means if it can have a positive impact on others, perhaps the demand for this good is higher than what is actually being exhibited in the market. So that's kind of an interesting phenomena. Some examples, it's nice when you have a class talk about some negative externalities, the exhaust that comes out of automobiles, and you are driving behind this car, but the car in front of you is giving out all this exhaust gas that doesn't look good. It's dark, it smells bad, and you are affected negatively by this action. You're trying to sleep at night, barking dogs. Your neighbor's barking dog is keeping you awake. And of course, the common thing is the burning coal, both at local and national level. In fact, the global externality, carbon, gets into the atmosphere and goes global, affecting the climate change. I have a couple of students working on papers in terms of carbon emission, not just locally, but globally. It's a huge thing right now. So take a look at all the links that I've provided, because you will be working on some sort of a debate platform on this area. U.S., unfortunately, is a big carbon producer. So is China. Both U.S. and China both account for 40% of the carbon emission, and it has contributed to global warming. So that's of huge concern. I have some nice pictures in terms of the Arctic melt. Take a look, and in terms of coal burning, what's happening, in terms of the emission in the air, the carbon dioxide in the air, which is, and the data, the evidence show that this is not good for our health. And so that's what we will look at. We'll look at the cost of having this. Some good examples of positive externalities are restoring historic buildings. If there is someone who's doing research on new technologies and that technology has a spillover into the society in terms of affecting people in a positive way, but also other firms who can actually benefit from adopting this new technology. Many of the negative externalities, that some emissions, sulfur dioxide and all, we have seen that if the firm adopts a new technology, instead of completely doing something new, but if they can adopt or sort of, integrate a technology that will emit less carbon dioxide in the air, can actually reduce the pollution, and the cost is not that much. So that's something to look into. People doing landscaping, and you love it. You look at your neighbor's house and there are flowers and beautifully landscaped. So you experience positive externality because you get some satisfaction looking at things that are looking nice around you. Think about, say, you are taking principles of microeconomics and your roommate or your friend who has not taken any economics course, and then you can perhaps explain to your roommate some of the economic phenomena and say, all right, this is what's happening, this is the cost, this is the benefit. So that spillover, your knowledge spill over to someone else who is not taking the class, is a bystander, is a third party, but is actually getting knowledge from you because you are taking it. Classic example, vaccination. If we all if we get vaccinated, we don't spread the infection or the disease or whatever the virus is at that time. So people who don't get vaccinated are actually receiving or actually experiencing positive externality because someone else has been vaccinated, but they did not partake in taking the vaccination. But the fact that majority of the people has a beneficial effect or impact on the society, right? Pretty easy to understand. There are not too many graphical analysis, and I will focus on those. What is, just to recap what we just did previously, remember welfare economics? I'm going to erase this because you don't want to leave this pen mark on the board. It's harder to erase. We did a welfare analysis where we looked at consumer surplus, producer surplus, and government surplus. But importantly, the point we made is every single point on the demand curve represents your willingness to pay. Remember that. It represents your value. The price on the demand curve that you're willing to pay represents your value for the good. This is really important for this analysis. And every point on the supply curve is what the sellers are willing to sell at that price. But importantly, it's the marginal cost of producing that good. So for them, the supply is really representing the marginal cost. And as you will see that the higher the price, they're willing to supply more because that would impact their profit. But importantly, it also reflects the private marginal cost of a single firm, the supply curve. And when we do firms, cost and production, we'll show you how to derive those. But right now, just take that as given, the assumption that we will draw on. Good. Supply curve is a cost. And we all, I'm sure you're tired of hearing it. Supply and demand intersects, we get equilibrium, which is the outcome of an efficient market, as we have said. So now, when we have negative externality, this is important. Take a note of this. Now I want to translate this negative in externalities, and it is good because when we do cost-benefit analysis, it gives us some good numbers to do so. There is a social cost. How do we determine the social cost? So we know with negative externality, remember this point, there's a social cost. This social cost includes the private cost of a firm to produce that good, all right, of the producers. Private cost. So I'm setting the context for what we will do. And plus, add, let me just put a plus sign, cost to the bystanders, or say third party, or the community, people who live there, affected. So it's a cost. Somebody dumps all their waste in the river, and some of the pollution goes into the drinking water. And so it is, the community is affected by that, affected adversely. That's a cost, adversely, all right, by the negative externality. So what the point we're trying to make is the production of a certain good obviously has the marginal cost, the private cost, but then if I take into account the social cost, the added cost to the citizens or to the bystanders, perhaps the cost to the society is much more than the marginal cost if we take that into account. So what I'm trying to say here is the social, if I can translate this social marginal cost, I'm going to use SMC from now on. So social cost is private cost plus the cost to the society. The social marginal cost is nothing but private marginal cost plus the external marginal cost. It's another way of looking at it, okay? Similarly, for social marginal benefit, it will be the private marginal benefit plus the external benefit. So social marginal cost is, if I can write this, which will help you. The reason is it's really important to understand these concepts before I graph it. So I'm setting the context in the sense that you will see how we shift the graphs, the curves right now because of the externalities. So let's take a look. Social marginal cost, I'm going to use this abbreviation now, is private marginal cost with no externalities. Because it's private marginal cost, there is no social cost because there is no externality. Similarly, if I take a look at the social marginal benefit, that is when we have a positive externality. So this negative externalities, this is with negative, without any negative externalities. Social marginal cost is nothing but private marginal, social marginal benefit. So just keep these two equations in front of you when I graph it. Marginal benefit is just the demand curve without externalities. This is just the supply curve. Yeah, I think this is good if I write it this way. This is nothing but just the demand curve. We are not bringing in any social marginal benefit or social marginal cost. Why? Because there is no externalities. Now, given these two assumptions, let's see what would happen if there is a negative externality or a positive externality. So, with externalities now, social marginal cost is private marginal cost plus external. You can write social external cost, but that's okay. You can just, this is with negative externalities. Keep this handy with you when you solve problems. Social marginal benefit then is nothing but private marginal benefit, which is nothing but just the demand curve, plus the external benefit. Think about a best example is vaccination, positive. Another good example is wearing a mask. Others wearing a mask will actually help you not getting COVID-19, but you are not wearing a mask, say, but you are surrounded by people who are all wearing a mask. So you're the lucky one. You won't be infected because people are wearing masks. And data shows that that is true. Mask has a great positive impact, positive marginal benefit on in the society. So, good. We have this done. Now let's start graphing this. And of course, you'll be working on assignments, but as I promised you, I will do a review of all the problems, old problems from old exams in these areas, because you may not, the problems that we have for you in MindTap and in the exams don't adhere quite closely to the problems that you find at the end of the chapter of the text. But the concepts are the same. I mean, you need the concepts. That's why I am writing the ones that you really need, or focusing you to the ones that you would actually be using when you are solving problems, both in assignments and in exams. So let's graph. This is our same demand and supply. Now supply, let's just call it private marginal cost, because we have already decided that's a private cost, you know. We can just say, you can even say private cost if you would like. And then this is the demand, which we said is the private benefit. This represents private. I'm going to adhere to my graph, and so that if you're looking at the graph in my PowerPoint, okay, this is private cost, which is really every single point, remember, is a private marginal cost. Now the production of this good is happening. This is the Q, this is the amount of the good produced, this is the price. But I find with the production of this good, there is pollution in the air. This amount is actually creating quite a bit of pollution, which is having a negative effect on the community, which is there is a social cost associated with the production of the good. Here, all I'm saying is that suppliers are supplying this good, demanders are, valuing the good, but nonetheless, the production of this good is actually creating some social cost, which is not only the private cost, we talked about it, private plus external. There's a cost to the external community. So if I could somehow, so this represents a higher cost in the society in having this good being produced, having the production of this good, because there is not only the private cost represented by the firm's private cost, but there is a negative impact on the society, which is the social cost. So another way of looking at it, because the cost is higher, you see the supply is to the left, representing a higher cost to the society, including the private cost. Another way of looking at it, that if I could, this Q is not good because it is creating negative externality. If I could somehow make the firms produce less output, then that would help in terms of less pollution, because this place is actually representing that we have taken into consideration the social cost to the economy. Does that make sense? And there are very many ways you can actually tax the firm. You can tax the amount of pollution. You can tax the amount, or you can actually tell them, I'm sorry, you have to adopt a new technology, and that will increase their cost, and then their supply will shift to the left and the quantity will go down. Right now, there is less production in the economy, as I mentioned in my first or second lecture, and we have seen the air has become cleaner because less production means less goods and services in the economy. Because of COVID-19, that also has resulted in a cleaner air globally, all over the world. So this is really the basics of this model that I have drawn. And now, by how much do you shift the supply is a matter of by how much do you want to shift the quantity. Because having this quantity would be the best quantity. By best, I mean the welfare would be good for the society. The welfare would go up. All right? Does that make sense? So, although this quantity is less than this quantity, as you can see, this is Q1, the second quantity is less, but it maximizes social welfare, although it's less than the market. And government, that's when we say government can actually internalize this market failure. So government can come in and say either come up with different mechanism, leave it to the free market somehow to resolve the problems. But we have found that that doesn't really happen very much so. A command control is government dictating, but we do not want that either. So there are different ways, different mechanism. We'll go on to that later on. Good? So this was a negative externality picture, remember that. Now, what if you had a positive externality? That means the society is actually benefiting from having the production of this good. So what that would mean is like vaccination or education. We find that education has not only, and especially subsidized education or low cost, free education, if you want to say, but we really don't have any concept as free education, but public schools, not higher education, but public schools. What we have is not only you get educated citizens who are knowledgeable and skills, but there is a spillover. So the society actually benefits from having more educated members in the society. So the society actually benefits from it. So let's do an example of a positive externality using the same graph. So social value is much more. I do need this space, so I do have to erase this part because I'm going to shift the demand because it has a positive impact. Even vaccination, the demand for this good is actually higher than what it is. So this demand would actually move. The social value, we call it the social value curve, is higher. Social value. This represents social value. Social value is actually to the rightward shift, higher. So this actually, the social value, remember, is both private benefit, private plus external in the society. You're adding both, is higher. So the society would actually, the market fails. Market is producing too little of this good. In negative externality, market was producing too much. So here, we would actually like more public education. We want like more public universities because the society would actually benefit. And there's lots of nice studies I do in my poverty and income inequality. It's called investment in human capital, getting people to be educated. The spillover effect is unbelievable in terms of other benefits. Not only other people get knowledge from the ones who are educated, but also we have find that there are less crime and drug use and other things that negatively impact the society. So, good. Yeah? These are the two graphs. Remember, this is positive externalities. And that means society would actually benefit from having more of this good. The actual demand in terms of our value is higher than the free market over here, what the market is, okay? And government can correct this market failure by internalizing the externality by providing more subsidy. As I said, public education. We need more production of this good. So the government can provide subsidies and can help. Okay, good. In terms of also when we have a technology, as I said, the technology spillover is a positive externality. Government can actually subsidize the technology in terms of so that there's promoting this technology because and will have positive impact. Patent law sometimes protects the right of the inventors when they come up with a good invention which has a good benefit to the society. You give them 15 to 20 years to have the sole right to be the only one producing the good, because in a sort of an incentive that you came up with an innovation that has a positive impact on the society. So that's how government can help with a positive externality. There are different policies. I'm not going to go through all of those. It's all on canvas, the command and control, that government comes in and regulates the behavior. There are also policies that are market-based, so that you give incentive. I'm going to erase this as I talk because it gets kind of difficult to erase later. Government can provide incentives. So private people can make good decisions. So if there is some sort of an incentive. We said rational people react to incentives. So what would be the incentives in terms of how do you make a firm, or how do you incentivize firms to produce less? Or could you do something that both parties, producers and consumers, negotiate with each other and come to a good understanding in terms of how much of a good should be produced or how much pollution should there be, So that's what we mean by internalizing the externality, is coming up with some policies, some device such that the market can hopefully take care of it by itself. But we have seen so far, although in some cases it has had positive result, but not necessarily all the time. One thing is, one market-based incentive policy is give people permits. So they buy permits. Permits actually give you the permission to pollute. Think about it. So some firms, if you create a market for permits, some firms will buy and some firms will buy, but they realize that, hey, we're a small firm, we really don't pollute. So there'll be a market for permits. They will exchange. The small firm will say, look, I really don't need to pollute as much as you do, so you have the permit. So there is a way, it's called the tradable pollution permit. But of course, you must have a certain amount of permits. You don't want to have so much permits that it'll be creating pollution. So the permit is in a quota form, that you can only have so much pollution in the air, and then you have a permit that adheres to how much pollution that can be in the air. So those are things that you can do. We actually have EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. They do enforce regulation. They do say, all right, how much pollution can be in the drinking water? They really can dictate in terms of, if they know But that's another thing. If you know if it's a point pollution, you know exactly where the pollution is coming from. But there are lots of non-point sources, especially in agricultural runoff, which you really don't know the source where the amount of pollution is coming in. So that it becomes quite difficult. And the Environmental Protection Agency can also mandate a firm that, I'm sorry, you have to use this technology. There's certain technology that you can, you have to adopt it, because we know this technology will reduce the pollution emitting from your factories. There are, of course, corrective taxes and subsidies. The concept of tax came from Pigou. He's a very famous economist. I have a link on Canvas. You should read on that. There is a Pigouvian club people join. And it was early on. I don't want to misspeak because I can't remember the date. He was so brilliant in thinking that we impose a tax such that we tax the firms who are polluting. That will make them take into account the social cost. So it's really increasing the cost for the firms who are creating pollution, so they will decrease their production. So those sort of corrective taxes, which can actually also increase revenue for the government and enhance economic efficiency. So do read about, I'm going to write this down so you remember Pigouvian taxes. You can actually use this in your debate. We ask a question, which side do you take? And you can say, maybe Pigouvian taxes will work best for this solution, okay? Of course, we keep talking about gas. The book talks a lot about gasoline, but part of it is there's negative externalities associated with driving. You're driving with gasoline. Not only there is congestion, accident, and pollution. So that's why sometimes people think a gas tax, it falls under Pigouvian. Gas tax is very, very, could imply a corrective tax. So we do pay gas tax. I can't remember exactly. I know the gas price is, say, about $3 per gallon. There is a tax. People complain the gas tax is high. Compared to the rest of the world, our gas tax is very, very low. Actually, we don't, And yeah, gas tax is corrective because there will be no deadweight loss area in the sense, but the debate is, should the gas tax be higher on gasoline? Most European countries have a higher tax. The developing countries have enormously higher tax. Sometimes some countries were paying $40 to $50 a gallon when there was a gasoline shortage. So for us, the gas tax is like, I can't remember what exactly the gas, but I think maybe 50 cents per gallon in 2017, if I recall. But if we really want the reduction of consumption of gas, some studies have calculated the gas tax, say right now it's 50 cents. Some people have said the gas tax should be somewhere between $2 to $3. So there's economists, this is what economists do. They try to figure out what should be the cost benefit from a tax and what would be the cost and what exactly should be the tax, okay? Tradable pollution permits. I think I'm going to do a Zoom video for all of these. They really don't require, I love this board because I can graph and write, but many of these things you really have to read in terms of the book and my notes, and I will think that should be really good. So as we mentioned, the government can impose some taxes, government comes in, but there are also market-based solution, which we call the private solution. I just talked about it, a private solution, and that was a private solution to correct externalities. And one big one came from Coase. He's an economist, and Coase's theorem talks about, hey, let the two parties negotiate and come to a good decision. So if the private parties can bargain without cost over the allocation of resources, maybe they can solve the problem of externalities. But can the parties reach a decision, a bargain? Will hopefully, this is what Coase was saying. Leave the parties to negotiate and come to a decision. Say you have a neighbor who has a barking dog and you just can't stand it because you can't sleep. So if you can somehow come to a conclusion, if you can offer your neighbor some money to get rid of the dog so that the dog will not be barking, it could be quite possible if somebody says, hey, I'm going to give you $600. Can you get rid of the dog? And somebody said, are you kidding me? 600 is not, I really get quite a bit of benefit from having this dog. Or it could be somebody could say, you know what? I'll take it. I'll give this dog to my friend. So, there could be instances where you could, this is what Coase's theorem is really. I'm saying this in a nutshell. So it depends, how much benefit your neighbor gets from having a dog and how much is the cost for you to hear the dog barking and keeping you up at night. How much are you willing to pay? Maybe you are willing to pay $1,000 so that you can sleep better. So it all depends on your preference map and your neighbor's preference map. And so there are nice stories in the PowerPoint slides. You should read it. There's some nice pictures, lots and lots of link in terms of what is happening in the economy. Private solutions may not always work because sometimes bargaining will completely break down, and it all depends on the transaction cost, So taking that. So economists really have worked. My whole point, the crux of the matter I wanted to show you, the economists have helped government and EPA. Many of my students work at the EPA or the Department of Commerce, talking about taxation, talking about what would be the right policies to reduce externalities, particularly negative externalities. We pretty much know about the positive externalities, and one of the solution is government subsidizing it. So there is more of the production of this good. Right now we're looking for vaccination for COVID-19. That would completely change the economy, and you would hope government would subsidize it and everybody could get it free of charge, you would hope, because the benefit is so tremendous. We can all come back to work and the economy would revive. And one solution is, because this is the impact of this virus is so severe and it is so easily transferable from one person to another, that vaccination would have a tremendous amount of benefits in the society. And then you would hope that government would subsidize vaccination for this sort of a severe virus. I'll stop at that and move on to the next chapter. All right?